Kia ora, folks. Welcome to the TTRPGs in Academia panel. I'm Kelly Whyte, I'm the host, and I'm going to be talking with two people who are much more qualified and much smarter than me on the topics. So I'll let them introduce themselves and their academic interests. Take it away, Shaun.
Kia ora, everyone. My name is Shaun Garea. I'm a lecturer at Mass University at the School of Psychology. My focus is sort of like cognitive psychology, and I sort of direct the Gaming Research and Investigation Laboratory known as GRAIL. So we're looking at games focusing on TTRPGs as my focus. Cool.
And Dylan.
So kia ora koutou, I'm Dylan Horrocks, and I've had a very strange journey towards academia that started with about 25 years as a freelance cartoonist doing graphic novels and comics, but I now teach full-time at Victoria University of Wellington in the School of Design, where I teach a lot of kind of storytelling and narrative in different media, from comics and picture books and animation and so on to games. And I'm really, as someone who's been a lifelong role player, role-playing games is a big part of that. Yeah.
So I guess the first question is, how do TTRPGs fold into your kind of field of expertise, your day-to-day work? Yeah, tell us a bit about that from both your perspectives.
You can start, Shaun.
Great. So I've always been a gamer ever since I was a kid. And my research work began predominantly in video games, looking at things like cooperation and aggression, and even things like gambling and OCD behaviors in gaming, in video gaming particularly. But I've always loved role-playing games, and in playing role-playing games, I continuously saw and experienced very unique sort of situations sitting around a table, this sort of collaborative storytelling element of this back and forth, and seeing people change their opinions on things, their behaviors, and their mood a lot of the time just from playing a game of collaborative storytelling. And this sort of moved me from video games into tabletop role-playing games, because I think there's real meat to the bone of that research space. So that's sort of how I've moved into that space, if that makes sense, from a psychological perspective. What's going on internally, what's sort of driving play, what people are getting out of it, and what are those benefits? Can we identify what those benefits are?
And I guess, I mean, I'm in a design school, so a lot of the engagement we have here with role-playing games is students designing them. So we and staff as well. I mean, I'm doing a PhD at the moment in creative writing through our creative writing school here at Vic. And that's all about how tabletop role-playing games open up new ways of thinking about narrative and storytelling, which I'm having a blast doing. I feel like I'm doing a PhD in D. I kind of get to play role-playing games, and it's part of my research. So I'm releasing it in the form of zines. So I'm kind of slowly publishing the PhD as I go as a series of zines, which are full of strange little in-jokes that only old gamers get. So that's kind of my own work at the moment. And each zine includes some comics, some essays, and some games. So I'm writing lots of little mini games and things. But I've also, we've had many students here. I was surprised when I started teaching to discover that these days, most of our students coming in have either played D&D or some other role-playing game, or if they haven't played it, they've watched people play it online. So that's a massive change, because certainly when I was a student, it was just a weird little fringe thing in the university. But now it's so common, and a lot of the students are really into it. So I try to create assignments in all of our courses that give them opportunities to design a game instead of doing some other project. And we now have an MFA program here in visual narrative, which I feel like there's kind of a silent word in that title. It's really a visual and ludic narrative program, because a lot of the students design games in that, both a lot of video games and visual novels and things, but also we've had tabletop game projects. And so we've had master's students who've designed role-playing games as their master's projects, and currently have a terrific PhD student, Emily Morris, who's just finishing up a PhD on investigating queer transformative play in tabletop role-playing. So they've analyzed how we use play in role-playing games to kind of interrogate and queer identities and rules and all sorts of things. It's a fascinating project. So Emily's been a real kind of star of our role-playing thread running through the school. But I'm very conscious, like the work Shaun's doing at Massey has been really interesting to follow. And there's a lot of, like here at Vic, we have therapeutic role-playing game sessions run by our counselling team in the student health organisation. And they run these therapeutic role-playing games, not just, actually they don't use Dungeons and Dragons, they're using a whole other games. Weirdly, Vassum, which is Swedish horror, somehow it seems to really work for this. But they've been running those for a few years really successfully. And so we have a couple of counsellors in the university who've been trained as therapeutic game masters. So there's a whole lot of stuff happening. There's research going into that. There's research going into games as design, as therapy, as literature, as art. You know, there's all kinds of stuff happening, and it's a really rapidly expanding field in academia around the world. And it's, I mean, I came into universities expecting to just be teaching and researching comics, which didn't exist in universities when I was a student in the 1980s. There was nowhere where I was kind of allowed to study comics. But these days, comic studies is a very established part of academia. But game studies followed quickly in its wake. And although game studies is 99.9% dominated by video games, analog research into analog gaming is currently, I would say, expanding exponentially, really quickly. There are some really good journals, a lot of really smart academics working in that field. And it's a field of research where the people researching it tend to be really into it. They play them, they love them. It's one of the most exciting parts of their lives. And so the research that comes out of that can be really exciting, really, really thrilling stuff. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I didn't know there were therapeutic game masters out there.
Oh yeah.
Paid GMs are new enough. I didn't realize that therapeutic GMs were out there. Yeah, so it sounds like both of you kind of come to this from a narrative perspective a lot of the time. You're contrasting video games with TTRPGs. Seems to be a big focus of your work at the moment. Is that fair to say, or?
If I jump in on that one, so in the way that sort of what I find really interesting when I'm looking at video games a lot of the time, one of the things that you find with video games and even things like board games is that the boundaries or the rules of the game are pretty strict. In that, with a video game, you can't break that invisible wall. You sort of like you hit that boundary. But with role-playing games, there is the ability, depending on your GM, of course, right, to sort of bend those rules. And the sort of idea that's sort of grown over the decades of the rule of cool, this idea where if something's fun in the moment, hey, let's just enjoy and make this moment, as opposed to be very strict with the rules, is a very different experience to game with, because it's sort of like a social negotiation all the time, back and forth. And I find that in role-playing games, you get that ability, and you don't get that in video games. So I think for me as a researcher, it's sort of it's a beautiful element and a curse, because the games themselves are much harder to, you can't sort of replicate a session in the same way that you would with a video. So I've done like research with the game Portal, if people know Portal 2. Great little game, but like you can set up sessions with players, they come in, they run the level together as two people, and it forces sort of cooperation. Like you can't just, one person can't Rambo the level, you have to sort of work together to get through the level. But then when we set up a new pair or new people, the only thing that's different are the people. The game is exactly the same every time, right? But with role-playing, dice mechanics themselves are, you know, unpredictable. And even if we were to try and rig that in a way, that the emergent storytelling and back and forth of collaboration in role-playing games makes it a harder thing to study. But I think that's why it's sort of we're seeing that growth now, as more and more people are being drawn to, as Dylan has said, especially post-COVID or during COVID and post-COVID, when people sort of really were like, I want to sort of see people and play with people, and role-playing games really seem to sort of be something that railing that people could hold on to, you know, even via distance on Zoom and things like this, and watch people play as well. Like just the idea, when I was a kid, you know, I would go around to my friend's house and sit down, and they would put in Ninja Turtles into the NES or whatever it is, and I'd watch them play, you know. But now that's not really a thing anymore, but you can go and watch people play online. So all of these elements that are sort of building into this sort of growing culture around role-playing games that we're seeing, particularly in Aotearoa as well. We're seeing this huge, great, unique sort of culture of gaming and design. I just want to be involved in that as I'm moving through the game space. I've seen a beautiful area that I'm drawn to, so that's where I'm sort of going. Again, I've probably walked right around the building of the question and ended up at the front door again, so hopefully that makes sense.
No.
And I feel like it's really interesting to me that like video games are obviously a far bigger industry. Like more people are playing them, and they make a lot more money. I mean, they're probably the biggest, the most lucrative entertainment industry in the world right now. So academic research tends to kind of follow the money, often not in a critical way. They oh, there's so much money there, let's all go and study that. Partly because you can then get research funding and all sorts of things. But there's a feeling that if it's a big industry, then it's obviously important as well. But I find it endlessly frustrating in game studies because like Shaun said, I mean, video games are very constrained. Like the only kind of gaming that I've really done throughout my life obsessively is tabletop role-playing. Every other kind of game, whether it's board games or video games or whatever, I've only been kind of vaguely interested in them because they're related to role-playing. But really, it's tabletop role-playing that has always been, since I was 13, this huge part of my life. And so for me, when I do try and play a video game, I'm like, oh, can I not do this? Can I not do that? Why do I have to, you know? And I feel like games, when I read game studies, articles or books that are talking mostly about video games, they're trying so hard to talk about sort of deep interactivity and the way we kind of have these emergent stories and these profound emotional experiences and all of that. They're trying so hard to do that. Or complex, interesting narrative experiences that are kind of new because they're emergent and they're interactive and improvised and all of that. And I'm reading these articles thinking, well, you kind of get that in video games, but by God, role-playing, tabletop role-playing, that's where you find the motherlode of this stuff. And it's significant to me that tabletop role-playing games also are so important to the history of video games. Like so much of video game history has really been shaped by tabletop role-playing. Some of the most fundamental conventions of video gaming were simply taken straight from D&D. And it's no surprise because really early video games were often designed by students who were playing D&D every night, and they wanted to create a computer game that would give them a similar experience. So
yeah, BioWare coming off from D&D, Fallout coming from GURPS, I believe it was. Yeah,
all that stuff. There's so many details like that. And so I often sort of feel like sometimes I want to kind of yell at the game studies field. It's like, guys, just turn and look. They're right there. You know, just look at if you look at tabletop role-playing games more closely, it will massively enrich all of the conversations you're trying to have, which is why I think, as Shaun said, I think it's one of the reasons that analog game studies is currently having a moment, and it's because a lot of people are realizing, oh, yeah, that stuff's really interesting. It's intense, and one of the things that I think distinguishes it is that it's very human. It's especially right now in the moment we're having, where humanness is kind of it feels like a slightly fragile concept right now, with the rise of AI and everything else, and transhumanism. And but like when LLMs started to really be a big thing with ChatGPT's public release and so on, the gaming industry, the video game industry, became very excited. And we're now seeing one of the reasons they were excited, which is they could fire half their developers. But they were also excited because they had this vision that they could use ChatGPT to make NPCs into something you could have a genuine conversation with, and you didn't have to script it. It could just unfold organically and so on. And you'd have these kind of human interactions because you could use AI for the NPCs. And I remember there was one of the senior Wizards of the Coast management who'd come straight out of video games, was talking about how exciting it was, the potential for AI to revolutionize gaming. And I was thinking, but everything you're talking about that AI can offer to the experience of a video game is done better by the fact that it's human beings sitting around the table for a tabletop role-playing game. Like, you don't need a machine to pretend to be a human. These are humans that you're talking to. And a game master or another player, if it's a GM-less game or whatever, you are constantly inhabiting these other living people and having these experiences that are deeply, deeply human. And I feel like that's one of the things that makes them such powerful games and such flexible games. And I think this is a good moment to be kind of leaning into that aspect of them, just the humanity of it and the reality of people doing this together as human beings.
And that flexibility is a very interesting trait, particularly to take your PhD student as an example, Emily. There's nothing inherently queer about D&D, for instance, as a setting, but through player interactions, through what the players bring to the table, it can obviously become about that kind of queer experience, even if the structure of the game, the themes of the game, was not initially intended. So yeah, that flexibility must be tremendous from a qualitative point of view, but more from a quantitative point of view. And this might be more in your wheelhouse, Shaun, where psychology and things have traditionally lived. You want replicable, you want one variable you can just tweak to. It must be very frustrating for producing that kind of work at the same time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, as I sort of mentioned, it is sort of a fun house of problems to solve from a quantitative point of view. But just on that point of identity, so there is research in psychology that's sort of identifying that when people, and it's more and more, it's coming up more and more. It's like that snowball rolling down the hill at the moment, which is great. But the idea that when people are playing role-playing games, the idea of playing a character actually ironically can make people feel more like themselves and explore more about themselves through this character. Like, intuitively you might expect that people are putting on a mask a bit more, but the research is showing again and again that it's actually more about taking the mask off and just sort of like being in a safe environment and just sort of exploring ideas with a sort of a safety net and with an understanding of the general rules of a game. It's that environment, and that environment around identity, around confidence, around anxiety, around socialization, all these things are just sort of like this hotbed of potential benefit and research that, as Dylan's mentioned, I know we're bouncing back and forth on this, but just this idea that there's so much great research that looks like it can be there, and more people are coming towards it now. But again, the money is in video games because funding, granting, and from an academic perspective, it's sink or swim a lot of the time. You're a shark. You're looking for funding. You're looking for spaces to, like, you know, like if you stop, you know, this bus does not go under 50, right? So like we just have to keep going, and often that can be the way to do it. But a lot of the times we can find spaces in teaching and in personal research that we can sort of explore this and help join the pack of research on this.
I imagine particularly TTRPGs are kind of resource intensive as well, because, you know, with a video game, you can give it to people and they go away for a few hours and play it, and then you do whatever you want to do. But having 5 or 6 people in a room that you have to organize, compensate them, must be an extreme challenge.
Yeah. So that's part of that fun house of problems, right? So it's just financially, it's harder to do, sort of to run sessions and or experiments, all these different things, because you've got all these in-person elements. Even if it's via distance, you know, you can't just run 200 sessions of Portal online and just get data. It's not the same sort of thing. But, you know, there are ways you can develop studies and work with them. It's just slower going. And, you know, it just means we're just very considerate of the limitations of the tools we're using, and the conclusions that we can draw, which I will say sometimes in psychology tend to be maybe overstated sometimes, or people might leap beyond what the conclusion was to an implementation that isn't quite there yet. And I get that sort of that itch to just go further and further, but it's a slow going because of those elements that you're mentioning. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah.
The flip side that I'll add is that students I've had who've designed games, when they're looking for participants in their research, it's a breeze. it's like, would you like to, you know, sometimes with research, it's like, can we interview you for 2 hours about the darkest times of your life or something? Or would you like to come along and play a role-playing game as part of my research? And so they've often, I had a student who, for her master's, designed a solo role-playing game, solo journaling role-playing game. It was also a keepsake game because they made bracelets and things as charm bracelets as part of it. She had no trouble getting participants at all for that. And yeah, I still, and sometimes I encounter people who were participants in it, and they come up to me and say, "Oh, I played that game. It was so cool. When is she publishing it?" So it is fun. Like that's something that is quite useful for research. I should say that also. I have another colleague at Victoria who's in the classics, School of Classics, Hamish Cameron, who is both a researcher and academic, but also a game designer, and has designed tabletop role-playing games like The Sprawl and Dinosaur Princess, which was designed with Hamish's partner, Dana. So he's designed tabletop role-playing games, but he also teaches a course in classics, which is on gaming the classics. And they look at video games that represent the classical world, but also sometimes he gets the students to design a board game together or something based on a particular moment in classical history. And I swear that course, you know, the enrollments are very strong. If you,
that's an interesting evolution of the kind of wargaming. Used to be very prominent way of kind of understanding the history of a particular moment. It's interesting that it's now morphed into TTRPGs as well.
Well, I think part of the roots of role-playing games, obviously wargaming was kind of a big part of the origins of tabletop role-playing. But a key part of that is that it's a simulation technique. You're using the game to simulate some kind of system or process or historical moment. And the way you construct the rules or systems to do that simulation shape the outcomes you get. In a way, academic research does the same thing. Like what we do is we are trying to understand some phenomenon or system in the world, how something works. And we tend to do it by constructing a model of it. And then we kind of play out that model and see if the predictions we make then happen in the real world. And running an experiment, as you said, Shaun, you know, you kind of like you want to create limited conditions so that you know which part of that model is leading to the outcomes. But I think all the time as an academic, I find myself thinking of it like a game, like both the methods that we use for research, but then also just, I mean, you're part of a big organization and it has hierarchies and all sorts of things. And yeah, it does have this, gaming a lot does make you think about everything as a game. That is one of its dangers, I guess.
Can I add a little to the stuff with Hamish? I've read a lot of Hamish's work as well as academic, fantastic stuff, particularly around classics and the integration of games. And there's a lecturer in University of Auburn called Dr. Emily Friedman, who is fantastic, and she runs Jane Austen role playing as a way to sort of familiarize students with language, culture, habits in those spaces when studying 19th century literature at the same time, right? And it's that word that Dylan mentioned at the beginning of that last bit, which was fun, right? So it's like, we've just done a big national survey of all different analog gaming types at GRAIL, and the number one thing that found why people play games, right? And this is a problem that academics, particularly from the psychological side, often forget when trying to turn them into learning tools or therapeutic tools or whatever a tool it is the number one reason people play games was fun, right? And I've played so many games developed by psychologists that were absolutely awful because they were developed with the outcome of learning or the specific outcome they want in mind, as opposed to, is this a fun game? Like, are people engaging with the game? Is there, like, does it make sense with what you're doing with the Ludo narrative of it? Like all of these questions are sort of forgotten. And I just think it's really useful that we've got people in these spaces integrating these ideas, but able to share these ideas with people so that we can sort of see the growth in the space. And this mindset of life as a game, as a problem-solving thing, can be a really useful mindset too.
Actually, there's a very interesting American academic called C.T. Nguyen, and he's actually a philosopher, but he's studied games a lot, including role-playing games. And he recently published a book called The Score. And what he's arguing in that book is that gamification, like everyone got onto the gamification train a little while ago in corporate world and political worlds and all sorts of things. And if we gamify stuff, people will enjoy their jobs and they'll work harder and so on. And he's sort of arguing in there that that yes, everything can kind of operate like a game, but when you forget the fun, it's like, you know, we play games because they're fun and because we get something personally rewarding out of them. I mean, a lot of definitions of game include that it's kind of pointless. Like the game doesn't have a purpose other than playing the game. I often question that, but his point is that if you forget that, the game just becomes another kind of grind, you know. And it also imposes a set of metrics, a set of measurements of whether you're successful or not, or whether something's working or not, whether it's going well or not. But those metrics might not come from you. You know, they come from the game, the structure of the game. And if you structure the game in a way that imposes a set of metrics that people don't really care about deep down, then it leads to something he calls value capture, where your values have been kind of replaced by the values that the game is imposing. So I am really, like, I think a lot of the work Shaun's doing and a lot of the research around therapeutic role-playing and so on, it's based on the idea that these games can be really helpful and really healthy and rewarding and enriching and so on. But there is another side to games too. And this is the case in tabletop role-playing as well. I mean, if anyone who's been playing role-playing games for a long time will have had really miserable, horrible experiences in those games, including players who use the game to bully someone else, or, you know, that's why bleed, the idea of bleed, where the emotions or the experiences or the sense of identity within a game can bleed out into your real that can be, a bad thing. It can suck. It can be really horrible. And so there's some really good research into that as well. In fact, the first ever academic book published about tabletop role-playing, which was in the 1980s by Garea, he wrote really eloquently about how bullying can work in role-playing games, how all sorts of hierarchies operate around the table, and how players sometimes just indulge kind of their worst fantasies. He wrote really well about that, and I feel like that almost disappeared a bit from the research into games for a while, because the people writing about them, we loved them. We were enthusiasts. We wanted to tell everyone how wonderful they were. But that's come back. I mean, there's Aaron Trammell is another academic who's written some beautiful books about. He argued in his book Repairing Play. He argues a lot of definitions of game and play. They say it's not play unless it's consensual and it's pleasurable or fun. Those things have to happen. And he says, but torture is a game. Like, torture is a kind of play. Bullying is a kind of play. And that's not consensual for the victims of it. And it's sure as hell not fun for them. But it might be fun for the person who's bullying. So I think that stuff's really interesting to me. There's so much there. You start studying role-playing games, there's no end to this. That's why I still haven't finished my bloody PhD.
Well, actually, that brings up something. We've kind of talked a lot about effects of TTRPGs on players. What kind of academic discussions are going on about TTRPGs themselves in your field? It might be anything from narrative design to like depictions of certain groups, things like that. I'm trying to think of what comes to the fore when you think of that sort of thing.
From my side, I mean, we're often looking at existing games and the effects that those games are having, right? So, but I mean, so we just had a student last year who did a look at, part of it was sort of queer representation and experience of queer players, and just the representation of anyone not like heteronormative in games. Like in the 80s or 90s, they might be presented in rule books as evil characters by default, or like if you are trans or anything like that. So just seeing the evolution as society changes, as the social norms change, and as Dylan was talking about Gary and Alan Fine's work, which is really, really interesting, particularly the constant back and forth at the table of moving between rules and the world that players experience. But this idea that we've seen as communities and as societies, the gaming culture shift, and sort of people who are sort of looking to explore themselves and provide a safe space to game is sort of somewhat taking a large portion of the TTRPG community space and sort of made it their own. If you look at a lot of sort of modern TTRPG design, it's dominated by thoughtful, considerate game design, queer designers, designers around cultural gameplay, exploring really interesting and diverse themes. And that's something when I was younger, absolutely, I wouldn't even have considered as something that would have occurred, because it was very, very dominated by at least the D&D sort of stuff, by that sort of Conan, like 1920s pulp version of harsh, hard, like sword and sorcery with some pretty high level violence in there and things like that. But I think over time, so in the space of psychology research, in terms of students and people I know who are working in it, just the evolution of what the ideas that you can explore in the game are really interesting. The idea of safety tools is something I'm working on too. That's really, really interesting, this idea, because in therapeutic practice, psychologists will often sit down with someone, set expectations with someone. They will do all these elements back and forth around what the expectations of the clinician is, what the expectations of the client are, and all these boundary setting. And the TTRPG space, it's not a clinical space at all, but they have set up a very similar setup independently a lot of the time, going, hey, look, so these are, if you want to join the game, these are the things that you want to what do you want out of it, this is what we want to do. You sort of you're going to link to these sort of times and agree to certain rules of the game. And then we've got all these elements like X cards and stars and wishes and all these different tools that help people explore. Lines and veils is probably my favorite one, this idea where people can say up front whether they want something in the game or not. Like, I don't want to engage with torture, it's just not in the game. And spiders are okay, but just off camera, please. I don't want to engage with, and research has shown things like, again, if I'm talking too much, just interrupt me, but there's concepts like trigger warnings, which are really, really well intended in media spaces, right? But study after study and meta-analysis of the study shows that trigger warnings actually are counterintuitive. They produce a lot of what's known as anticipatory effect. So a lot of people don't diverge from the content, even though there's a warning. And what they do is worry about the content all the way through a lot of the time. So it makes their experience worse, right? So knowing that from the research, it's like, okay, so what are some other ways you can sort of go negotiate that space to make some of these gaming spaces safer or more psychologically comfortable? And I think tools like Lines and Veils is a great way, because you can say up front, this won't be happening. And if this happens, we won't be directly engaging with it. Like little things like that in the development of games and the content that I'm directly involved in. I'm not so much involved in the direct design elements, looking at them yet, if that makes sense.
Whereas I guess, being in a design school, we spend a lot of time looking at the design of a game. And a lot of our students are wanting to design games. So I've got a frighteningly large number of shelves of role-playing games behind me, more at home. But I lend those out to students all the time who are wanting to create a game, and they've played D&D, they might have played one or two other games, maybe one PBTA game, but they might have never even heard of a game like Dialect or Fiasco or something, which has such a different approach to design. Something I share a lot with students at the moment is I'm really interested in lyric games. And I feel like here in Aotearoa, we've got some fantastic lyric game designers like Reefy Kenny. Morgan Davies done some beautiful lyric. There's so many people who've done wonderful lyric games, but I've printed out a whole lot of Reefy Kenny's PDFs that I've bought and share those with students a lot, because even if you're not designing a role-playing game, they're like little zine length things which completely change how you think about storytelling and gameplay and all sorts of things. The idea that you can use gameplay as part of an artistic project rather than just to play a game. You're structuring the game specifically to give people an aesthetic experience. How does that play out? What kind of mechanics do you design for that? The mechanic as a metaphor, things like that. So I spend a lot of time, and also how is that game communicated to someone who wants to play it? So the visual design and the communication design of a role-playing book or handbook is a fantastic case study in communication design, because it's an instruction manual. You want to give people a vibe, you want to give them tools they use, but you also want to make it readable. You want to read it before you play the game, but then you also want to be able to consult it at the table. It's a really challenging task as a designer and as a communicator. And again, here in Aotearoa, we've got some fantastic exemplars of that, like Tim Denny, whose games are masterworks, a masterclass of both game design, but also communication design. Tim's an experienced graphic designer, and it really shows. And the games are constructed around that. I think the game design is partly done with the final physical object in mind. we spend certainly in our school, we spend a lot of time actually looking at the games and playing them sometimes when we have time.
For anyone who missed it earlier in the week, Tim was on the visual art and TTRPGs panel, and that was a great listen. If anyone hasn't seen that yet, I believe we got the VOD on Twitch. Relating to that, like explosion of new new systems, new ideas, new themes. Someone in the chat asked, with the wider availability of digital TTRPG, like Itch or hosts like Roll20, how has that impacted your research, the topics you're looking at, or even just how you gather or information or decide a topic?
I can jump in with just a very quick example, which is I was writing an essay recently, and I wanted to say in my essay that there's been this explosion of creativity in the last 20 years, partly because of this, because people could just publish their game as a PDF online. And so I went on to itch.io and also DriveThruRPG, and I did some searching and some calculations and realized there was like 100,000 different games, tabletop role-playing game products on those or something. And that's just like, in the 1980s, it felt like you could own every single role-playing game that had ever been published. Now, there's no way you can even know about a fraction of them. There's just so much, and that's opened up the field to an enormous diversity of voices and styles and approaches and experimentation. I really feel like it's been an extraordinary revolution.
Yeah, on that point, I totally agree. I had it recently. I was like, oh, it'd be really interesting to look at any games focused on X topic to see, and it's just like, oh, I'll just check it, because like there's so many games now that there are games developed around these things, and then what you can do long term with that from a research perspective is sort of figure out if it actually is tapping into the things that it indicates that it might, right? And that's the thing with game design. From the game design side, is like designing a game, you want to sort of get the feeling that you're wanting the player to have, or you're wanting them to sort of explore. That's not always the case. So sometimes identifying what these games are and identifying what kind of responses they're getting from people is really interesting for us. But yeah, the idea that this explosion of explorations of different topics, any topic you can think of, is there, and you can sort of look at those games, see what they're doing, see how they're exploring things, see how they're sharing mechanics or not with other games, and sort of build studies around that from my perspective, if that makes sense.
And I think also, and this is something that my other field, comics, has gone through a similar revolution. But it used to be that to find a role-play game, you had to go to a game shop. Sometimes it might be a comic shop that stocked them or something. And there was a particular kind of culture in those places, and it tended to be very welcoming for certain kinds of people like me, white, nerdy, cis guys and so on. Was not welcoming to a lot of other people, including, women and a lot of queer people, and often non-white people weren't welcome as well. And so the fact that things shifted online did also kind of open up the opportunity to find games and discover the whole field to people who previously were just not really made that welcome. So that's been a big shift as well.
On that topic, I showed my partner the movie The Gamers 2 recently, and it's a fascinating look back at what the culture was like back then, that they're like, oh my goodness, a girl playing TTRPGs, and it's like, that's really not that remarkable these days.
Can I add? I was talking with some researchers, and they're doing a very big longitudinal study, and they've just added in some video game components into the longitudinal study. And they were talking about the findings with some other people, and the other researchers were like, "Oh, that can't be right." In terms of who are playing games. This is all games, not just role-playing games. But because it's essentially a 50-50 split between genders here, male and female, with a small non-binary component, but so essentially 50-50, and people just still didn't believe it. But those are the numbers. Those are the numbers. Globally, it's like 49-51, 48-52. Like, these are generally the numbers globally on gaming. So this idea that, yes, it was identified in films and been sort of plastered on screens, but now that people are playing a lot of time from home as well, it's harder to sort of put that on into sort of popular media to sort of set that new expectation. I think this, because it's hard, it's easy to make a film about, a group of guys sitting around the table and adding a girl in there. Everyone's like, oh gosh, there's one girl there. But it's a bit harder to make a movie about people sitting doing a Zoom call, you know what I mean? Or like, so I think the different changes in gaming and how people engage with games has made it harder for societies to sort of accept in general that the gaming public is, look, it's pretty 50-50 on this now.
Yeah, it's the same with comics. I mean, in the 1980s, there was this kind of sense that comics was just for boys, just for guys.
Yeah.
Mostly just nerdy guys, particularly white guys. But actually, there always were girls reading comics, women reading comics, making comics, and so on. People of color, all sorts of people were making and reading comics. They just weren't kind of being acknowledged and shown back to themselves and to other people as people engaged in that field. But in fact, in the 1940s, there was market research done into the comics readership, and they found that there were slightly more girls reading comics than boys. And then by the 60s, there was just a sense of like, hell no, girls read comics, you're kidding me. Now, I think we're back to the point where possibly more girls are reading comics than boys. And it's partly because of the rise of manga, which didn't make that assumption that they only had one audience. And graphic novels, which are, the biggest markets in graphic novels now are kids comics and YA comics, and often aimed at girls because girls are the ones who buy the books and read them. Anyway, that's comics. But I do feel like role-playing games has had a similar trajectory. I mean, right at the beginning, there were women involved. There were queer people involved. Some of the great originators of key role-playing games are trans people, for example. And it's just that story wasn't being told because the community around it was trying to tell a different story to itself. But a lovely thing about the last 10 years is that a lot of those stories are being told now, even about the early days, which is great.
Just before we go into a final question, don't forget for folks in the chat that we have a giveaway. Sarah will pop the instructions in there so that we can get everyone in before we have to wrap up the stream. So to bring this back to focusing on RPGs, what is there anything in the Aotearoa scene that excites you both academically or personally, whichever you like? To also put your own work or what you're working on here. I know you make some TTRPGs as well. So yeah.
I'll throw in, a game I backed it on Kickstarter. It's called Tapuia. It's a Tureo Māori RPG developed by a Māori development team and artists. I've played the game. It's fantastic. Seeing this development and this sort of local stories and local magic and gods and monsters and all of that told through a specifically Māori and Kiwi perspective is so awesome, because one of the things that I love doing is I go and run games all around the place, and when I do, I try and set a game in the town that I'm running, right? Because often we'll play games and we're going elsewhere and we're never sort of investigating our own backyard a lot of the time. So I really love games set here or using New Zealand as a sort of Aotearoa as a backdrop. So that's a game they're doing a print edition hopefully later this year. So look out for that.
And yeah, I like Shaun said, I feel like there's the community here in Aotearoa is extraordinary, and it's the last 5 or 6 years with the rise of KiwiRPG as a kind of network and a community has brought together people from all over the country, and even people living overseas who are Kiwis, who previously might have just been quietly making stuff on their own. I mean, I had a friend in the 1980s. We're still friends, but there's a friend who I gamed with a lot in the 1980s and occasionally have gamed with since, who published a game in, I think it must have been about 1990 or so, called Goblins. Malcolm Dale is the designer. He designed that with another friend who then went overseas and has worked in the video game industry for a long time. But Malcolm went on to be a graphic designer here in Aotearoa. But that game kind of went out into the world. No one quite knew what to do with it. It got picked up as a GURPS supplement, so there's a GURPS version of Goblins. But that was like an early example of a New Zealand designed tabletop role-playing game. But it didn't feel like there was a scene here of designers until recently, when we realized, oh, there's heaps of people in this country who are making role-playing games. And now it's also, we've realized, and also a whole lot of content creators and people who are doing actual plays and live performances and all kinds of things. That it's become such a lively, creative, and supportive community. And I've been enthralled by that. And I feel like one of the people like Morgan Davey, Cam Banks, Mike Sands, I mean, they've been designing games for a long time. Some of them have had really successful careers internationally as role-playing game designers. But it's also people like Reefy Kenny, who so far has been publishing these games as zines and PDFs online, but they're extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. A lot of really interesting Māori design. As Shaun mentioned, there's that game, but there's also Liam Stevens and Reefy Kenny have both been designing really interesting games from a Māori perspective. There's a game Liam's been talking about designing for a while, and I'm like, please gods, let that happen, because it's just an extraordinary game about Aotearoa from a Māori perspective, including colonization. It's such an interesting sounding game. And I had a master's student, Iwa Kingi, and she designed a really interesting Māori role-playing game about the effects of colonization called You Are Broken. And there was a live stream on Saturday of the newest sort of variation of that idea that she's been developing. And there were some interesting mechanics there that were really built around the negative effects of colonization, but also how people can build things out of that as a form of resistance. Yeah. So there's so much interesting stuff happening locally that I sometimes forget to look at what's happening overseas, because there's enough here to keep me busy.
Keeping up the full-time job.
Can I throw in quickly as well that when we do a lot of shows, GRAIL, and we talk to people, and we often have, Kelly, your lineages of the Long White Cloud supplement on the table for D&D, and it's such a point of interest for everyone. The art, for one, is fantastic, but just sort of making a Kiwi Aotearoa focused version of D&D and having animals and creatures that we connect with, and the design around those animals in line with what we understand of the character. I love the stuff that presents our identity onto these games, instead of just always, and it's not bad, but always like sort of like a faraway world or a faraway land. I do love that sort of that backyard in our games.
Yeah, that was a real
second that.
motivation.
Fantastic work.
Thank you. That was a real big motivation for that one, was to kids might be playing as a humanoid badger or rabbit or something, and it's like, well, that's not something that Kiwi kids maybe connect to as much. So that was one of the big motivations there. Yeah. We're just about to hit the end of our time. So is there anything you guys want to draw people's attention to? Any studies you're looking for participants for?
I'll say no particular. We've got a big study that's coming out later in the year that's sort of player habits across Aotearoa, motivations and stuff. So we'll put that out for free. So we'll let everyone know about that one that's done. But also I'm on the committee for the organising committee for a big gaming conference called Garea, which is last year it ran in Malta, this year it ran in Ireland, and next year it's going to run in Wellington in end of August, early September. Huge, big gaming conference, usually focused on digital games, but it's been having a huge focus on analog games since 2 years ago now, like bigger, larger sections each time. So we're going to be bringing in, you know, like academics from all around the world, designers, and sort of make Wellington a sort of a local hotspot for that period for academics and designers to get together and chat. So I just keep an eye out on that. I'll post more details about that as it comes out, but I'm really looking forward to that, and just tell people if you're interested, it's going to be something big international thing next year.
It's super exciting. I'm really stoked about that, Shaun.
Yeah, it's gonna be...
and I'm hoping KiwiRPG can join you there as well.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, a lot of what we're up to at Vic, we share on the Visual Narrative Lab, which covers everything from comics and animation to games of all kinds. The Visual Narrative Lab, and we also have a Game Studies Lab, which Hamish Cameron set up. And they both have their own websites, and the Visual Narrative Lab has a Discord as well, so you're welcome to jump on there. And I think the last thing I'd say is just, you know, if you love role-playing games and you want to make one, or you just want to go deeper into them, or you just want an excuse to play them a lot, more and more people are doing postgraduate study around role-playing games. But even at the undergraduate level, we're starting to kind of find ways to fold them into as much as we can of our teaching, and so there's a lot of opportunities. And it's not just me and Shaun. I mean, you'll probably find people scattered around most of the universities in New Zealand who would be keen to. In fact, Toff Eklund at AUT is another academic who's deeply immersed in tabletop role playing. So yeah, look around. It's happening, and it can be fun. It's not all footnotes and referencing. It's also a lot of play. Research as play, that's my thing. Play to find out. That's my motto as an academic investigating role-playing games.
I'm sure when you said that people can write one as a master's or a PhD, you've probably set people's goals there as well. Well, thank you both so much for your time, and thank you for coming on board and chatting with me. Questions from the folks in chat. Addressing the audience, thank you so much for being here with us, and do check out the rest of the stuff scheduled for the remainder of KiwiRPG Week. There's a couple days left to go. There's VODs on the Twitch channel if you've missed anything. A lot of the designers mentioned today are going to be on the Maori Creators stream tomorrow. And yeah, check out some KiwiRPGs, as well as KiwiRPG, the organization, if you have an interest in design. Thank you all so much for coming again, and thank you to both of our guests. And yeah, good day.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you.